Over the last few years, Porsche has built some incredible cars. Cayman GT4 RS, Boxster 4.0 GTS, Taycan Cross Turismo. But you'll notice that none of those has the numbers 911 on the back. Over the years, Porsche's made quite a lot of really good cars, and yes, many of them have been 911s, but quite a lot of them haven't. And that got us thinking, what have been the best Porsches ever that aren't 911s? Now, YouTube's algorithm means I need you to keep watching, so why not start at the very top? Yes, the Carrera GT. Now, back in the 1990s, Porsche was going to make a Formula One engine for a team called Footwork. But then several things happened. Either Footwork didn't pay their bills or Porsche got cold feet. The former is probably the more likely. And Porsche ended up with a V10 on its hands. Then, later, they decided they were going to build a car to race at Le Mans. It was called the LMP 2000, and then again, they decided for various reasons not to do it. So, they were left with two things, a V10 engine and the chassis from a Le Mans car. And some very clever person at Porsche looked at the two and went, I know what I can do here. And so the Carrera GT was born. When it was new, a Carrera GT would have cost you £350,000, which is about 600 grand in today's money. And that's fair enough, because you were getting a 5.7 litre V10, and that is about 2 litres bigger than it would have been even if it had been in a Formula One car. Also, it needed a radiator that was 5 times the size of that on a 911 turbo. And I'm told it was a little bit tricky to drive. It had a clutch that would probably have been better in a racing car, so driving it at slow speeds was nearly impossible, and the handling on the edge could get a little bit fighty. But apparently stick some modern tyres on it and it all gets really nice. Just how much Porsche can you get for your money? The answer to that question is found in the first generation Boxster, because you can pick one of those up for about £5,000. And I know it's got a reputation as a hairdresser's car, and some people might say it's not even a proper Porsche, but they're all wrong. What you get is a mid-engine sports car with some proper Porsche handling and really communicative steering. It's even got a flat 6. It's just not one of those rear-engine Porsches you might think of when you think of the badge. But today, a Boxster's got a flat 4 and it's not quite as good. There is a downside. It's not exactly Porsche 911 turbo lengths of hold onto the steering wheel as hard as you can power. It had a 2.5 litre flat 6, but it didn't even produce 200 horsepower. It was fixed later on in its life, but if you're really going for something that's going to set your hair on fire, maybe don't go for the Boxster, pick something else. But if you want a small, pretty, and yes, let's be honest, it is pretty, sports car for not a lot of money, and a Porsche, there's really not a lot of other places you can look. Back seats, electric windows, electrically adjusted seats, an electronic boot release, air conditioning, a rear windscreen washer. Those are all things that you don't need as far as Porsche was concerned. If it was 1992 and you wanted to buy a Porsche 968 Club Sport, the 968 was a front-engine Porsche that followed on from the 944, and it was, well, it was fine. But what Porsche really wanted to do was make something better than fine. So they ditched all of those things and a few others, and it saved 50 kilograms over the standard car and created the Club Sport. It still had the same 3 litre engine you found in the 944, which was an inline 4-cylinder, which sounds horrible, but it had now been given what Porsche called VariaCam, which was their version of variable valve timing to give it a little bit of extra poke. So they didn't change the engine from the standard car at all, but what it did get was bigger brakes, fatter tyres, aluminium bits in the suspension, and various other things that created what has been called the best handling Porsche of the 1990s. And that's not my words, that's the words of Walter Roll. And he knows a thing or two. I got the chance to drive the Cayman GT4 RS at the start of last year, and to say that I liked it might be an understatement. Yeah, it's that good. If the 968 was the best handling Porsche of the 1990s, then this is definitely the best handling of the 2020s so far. But how do you make the 718 the best handling car of the current decade? Well, it's easy. You take the engine from the 911 GT3 and you somehow cram it into the middle of the Cayman. And then you put a big rear wing on the back, and then you fiddle with the suspension, and then you do a lot of other things, and you let it rev to over 9,000 RPM, and suddenly it becomes one of the most incredible experiences you can have in a car. It really is genuinely that good. It'll hit 62 miles an hour in 3.4 seconds, and it's got a stupid swan neck wing on the rear. What more could you want? There are some downsides. As nice as that engine is, it gets really annoying after it's right behind you for a journey, and the suspension will do its best to render your spine to rubble. But other than that, it's fantastic. What was the first hypercar that Porsche ever made? It wasn't the Carrera GT. It certainly wasn't the 918 Spyder. No, we're going back to the 1980s. Back then, a man called Peter Schutz had just taken over in charge of Porsche, and he and his engineer Helmut Bott were wondering exactly how far they could take that rear-engine 911 concept. The logical conclusion to those ponderings was to give it a massive four-wheel drive system and create the 959. And where else to test your brand new four-wheel drive supercar than obviously Group B rallying. Now, the Group B rallying pipe dream was snuffed out pretty quickly by the discovery that in order to go rallying, you actually had to build some cars, and you couldn't just turn up with a production mule. But when the 959 was released, it was the 911 taken to its logical extremes. It had that clever four-wheel drive system. It had a damping system that would lower the car in order to reach its maximum speed, and it had an engine derived directly from that was in the current Group C racer. When the 959 was released, it was the fastest car in the world. It could quite easily top 200 miles an hour and hit 62 miles an hour in 3.4 seconds. The Ferrari F40, which arrived a few years later, took 4 seconds to hit the same mark. The 959 really was the zenith, the hypercar of its day. Okay, so this isn't technically a Porsche, and it does look quite a lot like a 911. Should it be here? Well, have another look at it. It doesn't actually look like a 911, does it? It's mid-engined for one thing. The name showcases exactly why the Ruf CTR3 existed. CTR3, Group C Turbo Ruf. Third. It was Ruf's homage to the great Group C cars of the 1980s. When it arrived, all it had that really made it a 911 was those lights. Everything else was different. It had a bespoke aluminium chassis made by Multimatic. That twin turbocharged 3.7 litre flat six had been moved from the back into the middle, and it now had 700 horsepower, which meant that the Ruf CTR3 could hit 235 miles an hour. There was a price though, and it was about £400,000. But, I mean, just look at it. Okay, let's get the elephant out of this room straight away. The roof on Porsche's 987 Boxster Spyder was an absolute joke. It had a bit of a nasty habit of, well, coming off at any kind of speed. It must be said that since then they've made them a little bit better, although they're still like erecting a particularly difficult tent. But that's pretty much where the bad things you can say about the 987 Spyder end. Hydraulic steering, a proper engine, a lighter chassis than the actual Boxster had because it didn't have any of that annoying roof mechanism. This was perhaps the perfect Boxster. The engine was actually now a little bit smaller than what had gone before at 3.4 litres, but it was the one that was taken from the Boxster S. So you now got 320 horsepower, and you could hear that engine sing at all times, partly because the roof had probably fallen off somewhere on the M4. And there was also some more prices you had to pay. They dropped 80 kilograms in weight by taking out the roof, but not just the roof. They'd taken out the radio, and the air conditioning, and the electric seats, and several other things. But you could option them back in, and most people did. There is no other way to get such a limited edition Porsche for the money, because they only ever built 2,000 of them, and you can still get them for under 70 grand. Those are our favourite Porsches that aren't a 911, but, well, there's probably a good chance you disagree, isn't there? So, go and let us know in the comments, and then if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, and then subscribe to the channel, and you'll see everything that we do on Goodwood Road and Racing.